Welcome, everybody. Hope everyone is good and settled in and feeling well, and is feeling as warm as you can, depending on where you are. But yes, welcome to another time together, another webinar, and in this virtual space together for our CHW onboarding. We definitely just like to welcome everybody. Thank everybody for joining us again. So before we begin and before we get into all of our agenda items and operating agreements, just want to go over some of our translation and closed captioning information. All right, so basically this meeting will have simultaneous Spanish interpretation. As a participant, you will need to choose a language, either English or Spanish, to listen in Zoom. And if you don't choose a language, you will not be able to hear the presentation, and that's important. So basically the instructions is in your meeting / webinar controls, and you can see the image and some directions on the slide as well. Click interpretation and click the language that you would like to hear. And it's optional to hear the interpreted language only. If you want to do this, click mute on the original audio. And our closed captioning instructions. So basically, this Zoom webinar obviously will have automated closed captioning. Closed captioning can be turned on or off throughout today's meeting. To manage the closed captioning on your computer or laptop, click the CC Live transcript, select Show or Hide Subtitle to view captions, and you can also select View Full Transcript to see the entire written transcript from today's meeting. And I'm sorry, I saw something in the chat and Zoom there. To manage closed captioning on your mobile device, go to your Zoom controls and click meeting settings, and then use the toggle button to turn on and off closed captioning. So definitely wanted to point that out and give people as many options as possible to get whatever they need to really take everything in today.
Yeah.
And yes, so welcome everybody to CHW onboarding. Super excited today and grateful just to be in community with you all, continue to learn, and yes, be in this virtual space for yet another Envision webinar and time together. So I guess just before we go into even more, a little bit about myself. If you don't know, my name is Jamal Perry. I'm a trainer with Envision Equitable Healthy Communities Training and Technical Assistance Center. I'm currently located in Milwaukee, where I do have deep roots in the community and doing CHW work and continuing to find out and align myself with actual CHW work, and realize that I've been a CHW for a long time, and continuing to be connected to community is something that's super important to me, and why I'm on this Envision project. And much of my work was involved in LGBTQ plus health promotion, anti-violence advocacy, and really being on the front line as a public health staff member in Milwaukee at one of our community-based organizations doing CHW and community health promotion. Right. So just to start off our time together, we're just going to go through some of our operating agreements. I want to just highlight all of those so we can continue to learn and be in this learning culture that we want to create. So complexity, there are multiple truths, and a truth is not the same as the truth. Curiosity, we lean into what we don't know, and we also struggle together. Voice, participate throughout and fully, and make space. A good acronym to consider is, wait, why am I talking? Or landing the plane, or all those different things we could say. And of course, non-closure, that we will go where we need to go and be where we need to be, and we can offer first drafts and build from there. There will be many starts to many of these conversations and ideas that we want to continue, and that is okay, because we don't have to finish today, but we can take those things and continue to learn and process those things. And of course, the Zoom agreements. I guess I looked over that, but remember to just stay on mute when you're not talking. If you are talking and want to share, please do say your name when you're talking, just so we know who you are and where you're coming from and who we're listening to. If you can, turn your video on if possible. We understand. We also understand there's multiple things happening in our life and might have to simultaneously be working, but do what you need to do to take care of yourself as always, and what's comfortable for you. Definitely use the chat box for questions, ideas, inputs, things that you're processing. We'll definitely be able to look at those and share those or reflect on those as well. And yeah, like I said, take care of yourself. Now we'll go to the agenda. So yeah, today's agenda, basically there'll be an overview of Envision, and then we'll dive right into our best practices for getting started with CHWs and that onboarding process, and super excited for that, as well as a panel discussion, having some awesome people here to share their knowledge and be in the space with us as well. There will be a time for Q&As to get all those questions out that you might have and want to ask our panelists, and then we'll wrap things up. So a little bit about Envision and who Envision is. So Envision CHW Training Center, also just known as Envision, is composed of community health workers and community health worker allies who work together with financial and administrative support from the CDC to elevate the role of CHWs. Envision does support CDC recipient organizations and the CHWs that they partner with to address COVID response and resilient communities, also known as CCR. And development for CHWs by CHWs, the 4-year project encompasses the CHW movement as a whole and trains and supports CHWs, and concentrating on that capacity building and sustainability of a strong, capable CHW workforce. So all of that amazing work and really highlighting the work that CHWs do and supporting them and building that capacity. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it off to CHW and Julie and her team, who are going to get into the best practices for working with CHW. So welcome to.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamal. Well, good afternoon, or for some of you guys, it may still be good morning. We're on the East Coast here in South Carolina, so it's afternoon for us. Really excited to be here today. The reason that we're doing this particular webinar learning collaborative today is because, as Jamal said, the Envision Center is your partners to help implement and grow and develop your community health worker efforts. Again, we are here to respond to what you need. And so the reason we're broaching this topic today is because a number of people have reached out either through the AMP system in CDC, but also through the rapid needs assessment and in some of the grant applications, saying that folks were curious about best practices in onboarding. We know that for some recipients, they may have been working with CHWs for years, and for some, it's a very new thing, and that is completely fine. Here at Envision, we're really excited to walk alongside you and partner with you, no matter where you are in your community health worker journey, to help you do that as best as you can and to meet your goals. So one of the partners in Envision is us here from the Center for Community Health Alignment. We are based at the School of Public Health at the University of South Carolina. And the Center for Community Health Alignment, we call it a flower pot, because really what it is it's an organization that holds other entities that have a lot of synergy between them. And those three entities are the Community Health Worker Institute, and then PASOS, which is really important because PASOS is a community-based organization made up of CHWs who work within Latino communities throughout South Carolina. And then we have another bucket of work called Equity Through Meaningful Community Engagement. So you'll see us interacting with you as the Envision Center, but you also may see that we're part of the Center for Community Health Alignment, and just wanted to let you know a little bit what that meant and who we are. So next slide, please. I guess I should take a minute to say who I am. My name is Julie Smithwick, and I'm the director of the Center for Community Health Alignment. I am a proud community health worker, and this year I'm actually celebrating 25 years of having been a community health worker. For the first probably 10 years of that, I didn't know I was a community health worker because I went by a different title. And I knew the work and the scope that I was doing. And I knew I was passionate about it and folks responded well to it, but I didn't know there were other community health workers out there. And that may be similar to some of your journeys or the CHWs that you work with. And then when I found this community of community health workers, I realized, wait, that's me. There's a community out there, and I've been working to further that movement ever since. So very passionate about our field. So I know everybody probably knows this, so I won't spend much time on this slide, but just to kind of level set us, we typically use the definition that was created by the American Public Health Association Community Health Worker section of who are community health workers, and these are the points that are included in that definition. It's also important to note that the National Association of Community Health Workers, or NACHWA, also formally adopted this definition as our definition as well. I say our because a couple members of our team are also currently on the NACHWA board. So shout out to my fellow board members that are out there. But community health workers, as you guys see, frontline public health worker, trusted member of a community or an unusually close relationship to that community. You see intermediary, you see facilitating access and improving quality of services. You see building individual and community capacity, which is what we here at the Envision team and the various entities that make up Envision are so passionate and excited about, which is building the capacity of community health workers and the organizations that support community health workers. And then, of course, a lot of our roles include outreach, education, informal counseling, social support, and we can't ever forget advocacy. Next slide, please. So to kick us off today, super excited to get to the last point in the agenda, which is our panel. We've got three fantastic panelists that are going to share with you some of their live experiences in all of this stuff, talking about, you know, hiring and integration and working with teams and the yeses and the nos and just, you know, so we can all learn from them. But my colleague Andrea and I wanted to walk you through a couple tools and some things that we have learned and gathered and now have been able to put out there for others to use as we set the stage for our panelists. So we're going to share with you in just a minute a link where you can access some best practice toolkits. And these toolkits, what's great is, as Jamal mentioned, these are tools, and most of our work is really CHW led, CHW developed. So it's work by CHWs who've been in the field and been doing this and learned from our experience that are now informing the practice of CHW work, along with fantastic long-standing allies that are critical as well. These toolkits in particular were developed by community health workers and subject matter experts throughout the state of South Carolina. And they convened for over a year and a half to pull together these toolkits around best practices and really discussed, like, does this make sense? What do you do? Here's how I do it. What would we suggest? What would be the ideal scenario in a workplace? And they're really based on their lived experience as community health workers in diverse settings. So next slide. Again, this toolkit is by no means the only one out there. We know that there are a number of different toolkits and things that you guys can use, but we wanted to at least let you know if this is something that you or your partners are interested in. These are some kind of introductory toolkits to some things that are very critical for implementing community health worker programs. You'll find that right now we have 3 main sections and then kind of a special toolkit. We are also, well, I'll go through those first. The first one is on designing a community health worker program. The second one is working effectively with community health workers. The third one, which is something that our community health workers here were very passionate about putting forward, is how to screen and respond to social determinants of health. Because as you know, that's a space where community health workers are especially effective and needed, but it's not simple. Any of you who are community health workers, you know it's not just, hey, you know, do you want some food? Here's some food. I mean, it's not a simple process, and it's very sensitive information that we have to gather and respond to. So this is a toolkit around how to really make that process work well. And then the fourth one is a piece that we've added on related to perinatal community health workers. So community health workers who are really working with parents when they're pregnant and after that birth. We are working on 2 more toolkits that we'll add to this same link. One is working with community health workers in rural settings, and the next will be showing the data and impact of community health worker programs. So just a tool for you guys to use if it's helpful. Next slide, please. So I'm going to speak just a little bit about recruitment and the hiring process. So in terms of recruitment, we've got to remember what is important about our community health workers, right? And I can't say enough about relationships and trust. That is the heart of what makes a good community health worker. Now, yes, there are other qualities: compassionate, empathetic, resilient, right? But the biggest piece is that there's got to be a strong relationship with the communities that they're going to serve, that we're going to serve. And there's got to be trust, or that ability to develop trust. And so you're not going to recruit for applicants in the same way that you might recruit for other types of positions. That's really important to keep in mind, because if it just goes on like a state website or on an Indeed.com, you may not get the applicants that you need, you know, and the conclusion could be, well, we don't have good applicants, but it may be because you didn't go to the right places, right? So really looking to, where can I go in my community where there is a trusted place, a trusted organization, leaders that are trusted, and ask them to help me find the candidates that they think are the right fit. In addition to that, having an experienced community health worker, whether it's from your organization or another organization, right? Sit in on that interview team and review those resumes is critical, because those of us who are in the field pick up on certain things that we know are critical for this work. We can pick up on those qualities. We can pick up on their ability to grow into the position if that's what's required. And so it's really helpful to have that expertise on your team. And then the person who's going to supervise the CHW, definitely making sure that person has experience with community health workers and is part of that hiring process. Next slide, please. So again, back to those 2 words, relationship and trust, right? So when we think about hiring the right CHW, why is that important? Because in order to do the work of a CHW, you've got to have the right type of candidates, the right qualities for your CHWs. They need to have that knowledge of the community that they'll serve, the qualities that I've already mentioned, and those skills. Now, a lot of times community health workers, before we ever give any kind of training, already bring these skills. The qualities we have to bring, because qualities can't be taught, right? They can be built upon, and the skills can be built upon those qualities. But a lot of times the CHWs already bring those skills, and in the training that happens, those skills and those qualities can be enhanced and built upon. So making sure they have those that are relevant to what your goals are, and especially the communities you're going to serve. I've mentioned trust about 1,000 times, but I'll probably mention it again. But also that lived experience, right? Folks who share experiences with the people that they're going to be working with and the communities that they're going to be serving. That ability to connect and to build relationship is more important than formal education. And we're going to get into that a little bit more. Next slide, please. So here's an example, trying to select the right candidate. Let's say that, we talked about having a toolkit related to perinatal CHWs. Let's say that you're wanting to hire a perinatal CHW in an area that has high rates of infant mortality. You want to think, okay, I really need somebody from that neighborhood, because infant mortality is not something that's easy to solve, right? It's not a box that you can check. It is about relationship. It's about addressing really deep set inequities and social determinants, right? So you really need somebody who can form a relationship of trust with the people you're going to serve. And that person needs to have roots and connections to that community. Ideally, you want somebody that's of the same race or ethnicity as the majority of that neighborhood, or at least has spent some really well-earned time developing those relationships and that trust of that community already. And certainly because it's perinatal, then we want to make sure they have some experience working with parents and babies. Next slide, please. So a couple things that we need to keep in mind when we're hiring our CHWs. One of the things that always comes up is salary, and how do we set those salaries? And especially if we're working with state institutions that have very rigid pay scales and classifications and job categories, then a lot of times those institutions will base those salaries that they offer on education and experience in a formal institution, right? This is a really important point here. To hire the type of CHW that's going to be effective, having that experience and that trust and ability to form deep relationships with the communities that they're going to serve are the most important qualities of CHWs. So what does that mean? Sometimes you got to push against the things that are already established and the ways that salaries and jobs are determined, right? We just had a point here that we were discussing today about not being able to find a community health worker in a very rural, high priority area of South Carolina because the state system put out that it needed a master's degree in order to offer the salary we wanted to offer. We couldn't get the candidates that were right for the community. So now we've had to retract that job description, completely change the educational requirement and put it back out. And now we're getting candidates that are more in line with the work that we want to do. So again, sometimes it takes pushing against those rules and saying, no, this is what's important. It's not, these other standards. And then the second thing I'll mention is background checks. So again, we know that for a lot of institutions, it's important to promote the safety of team members and of community participants. I will say, and also shared lived experience with those communities is critical. It's not, an additional quality. It is critical to this work. And so if there is a way to reconsider how background checks are done, or what entity is used, or if there are some other alternatives, if a background check is going to be, it's going to turn people away, that's another piece to reflect on and dialogue about with your team. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andrea, and she's going to talk about some of the things that organizations can do to support onboarding and hiring the right CHWs. Next slide, please.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. I'm very excited, one, to see all the community health workers in the chat today. but also to be able to share these best practices that, as Julie mentioned, were co-developed with community health workers that are in the field, really sharing their experiences. So I work alongside Julie at the Center for Community Health Alignment and have the privilege of serving as the director of the Community Health Worker Institute. And so I had the privilege of working alongside the community health workers who developed these particular strategies. And so Julie went over recruitment and interviewing, and congratulations, now you've hired the right community health worker. So where do we go from there? Organizational culture and practices are such a key component. When we think about now you've recruited the right candidate, let's talk a little bit about retention and also how to implement effective programs. And so one of the things you really want to consider is how to fully include community health workers into the culture of the team, into the culture of the organization. And it's also important to make sure that that team culture and the structure meets the needs of community health workers. And so it's critical for the success of community health workers, critical for the program, for the team and organization to ensure that the community health workers are fully included from planning to implementation and even evaluation. And so in the next slides, we're going to really talk about what it looks like to successfully onboard, what it looks like to successfully include community health workers throughout the process. Next slide. And so to start, we talk about maximizing the work of community health workers. And so Julie highlighted the roles and skills and qualities that make community health workers really effective at the work at hand. And so we revisit the fact that these core qualities and skills make up what we call community health worker core competencies. And these core competencies are really all the tools needed to support individuals in the communities that are being served. And so remembering that community health workers are the bridges that really connect the community with the services that we're seeking to make sure are at hand. It's a huge balancing act. So it is hard work, but we know it's also hard work. And so it's tricky, but if you have the right structure and support in place, it really can be something done successfully. Next slide. So one of the key things with managing the balancing act is really to focus on how to best support community health workers. And that really starts from understanding the interactions that we have with the communities that we're serving. And so a lot of times we go into program implementation and think about the targets that are at hand. So we understand that as a part of the work, there's the boxes we have to check. So some examples we know there may need to be screenings, or we may need to increase vaccinations or decrease readmissions to ER. But we also understand a lot of this work really ties into some core skills that community health workers have: coaching and relationship building, which Julie emphasized quite a bit, and also considering trust as well. And so the interactions that happen with community are all really in relationship with community, and goal setting and coaching is a huge part of that. So although we may have those key set goals that we're aiming to achieving, we also want to make sure that it's balanced in thinking about whose expectations are we meeting. So if there is an organizational expectation, that's not necessarily what we want to lead with. We want to understand that the goal setting really does derive from the community and individuals that we're serving. And so that bottom up piece. So we know we want to improve X thing, whether it be reducing readmissions, but we also want to check in, and as we alluded to earlier, with meeting unmet needs or how to address social determinants of health. What are those goals that community members, patients, clients, participants, whatever bucket they fall in for you, and tying that into the work. And so as you can see, it really is a unique role. And that's why a supportive team, supportive supervision, supportive organizational culture are so key to these roles. Next slide. And so where can you start? Education and awareness is so key to creating a supportive and inclusive environment. And this slide isn't dedicated to community health workers. How do you educate the other team members? How do you educate the full staff? How do you educate leadership? And how do you create awareness in the communities that you're trying to serve about the community health worker role? So it's really key to engage the full team and making sure that community health workers are a part of that process from the beginning. And so as you're having team huddles, as you're planning for programming, as you're thinking about your communication structure, how are you taking into account the unique roles of community health workers? But even a step above that, how are you engaging community health workers in the discussions as they're happening about program implementation and outreach and how you reach the communities that you want to serve? Next slide. And so one of the best strategies that comes up a lot, and especially from the community health workers that engage as a part of this process, training is key. And so we understand that when you're onboarding, that you may need to know what the Wi-Fi password is. You may need to know where to get your key fob. But even beyond that, how do we make sure that there's clear understanding about the roles, skills, and competencies that really support effective work? And so one strategy will be to focus on what trainings are available for the community health workers that you're hiring. In some states, there are core competency trainings. And in others, even above and beyond, there are specialized trainings, continuing education. So for example, to stick in the example of perinatal health, what additional training would someone need if they're working with moms and babies? Would that be breastfeeding certification or anything under that umbrella? Where can you provide additional support for success in the role? But also thinking about the team around the community health worker. Do supervisors have a full understanding of the role, skills, and competencies? And in what ways can we support the full team through training and continuing education? Next slide. This really is the next step, another step of this process, and one that comes up quite a bit. How do we know if the work that is happening is working? And tracking and documentation is a really critical area for this. So much so that it will be a community of practice in the near future, really talking about options for tracking the work that community health workers are out in the field doing. But one of the important things to note, as you're thinking through how to best capture the work that's happening, or how to best tell the story of how engagement is happening with community members, what are some ways that you can engage the full team, especially community health workers in this process? And so that may look very differently for different organizations, whether you're clinical or community-based, but it's also thinking through things that are very tangible, ensuring as a part of the onboarding process that community health workers have a full understanding of your internal structure, of the processes that you have in place, of the workflows. And even if that means bring the whole team together, community health worker included, in talking about and walking through what is your process? Where do those handoffs happen? How do we communicate as a team? So including community health workers, if you're in a clinical setting, and your daily huddles, or if you're in a community setting and your staff and team meetings, but creating dedicated time to ensure that everyone is aware of what happens from point A to Z. And communication is really key in being successful in this. So it's important to make sure that there's some process and space in place to engage with everyone on that team, and having irregardless of what tool you may use, whether that be an EMR or an Excel spreadsheet, that process is clear to everyone involved. Next slide. So I had a colleague earlier today say, we need to bring community back into community health. And that stuck with me the full day, because it's a huge part of the role of community health workers and being able to connect to community resource. And so the two previous slides, or a couple slides before, actually reference an article about not co-opting the role of community health workers when integrating the community health worker model into your organization or system. And that's really important to understand, that we work with a lot of organizations who struggle with, I've hired this community health worker, what does their day look like? Well, we have a medical assistant and they sit at, they're here in the clinic 9 to 5. that's not what we're looking for. That's not successful in this role. Really, you want to be able to create opportunities for community health workers to connect and engage with other community partners. And that could look differently depending on your community. But if there's a community coalition, you want to have the opportunity to be in that space, to connect with the resources, the services that are in the area. And even when we go back to addressing the social determinants of health or those unmet needs, we know that we all don't hold all the answers for every need that may arise. And so those connections, those relationships and trust, it's a theme here. It's so critical, even when it comes to connections beyond your team and outside of your organization. So being able to identify opportunities for collaboration is really key. And also it's an opportunity to understand that the work may happen outside of the regular hours. And so creating that system that we just talked about, how can you document and track that time? Well, I didn't see so-and-so in the clinic all day. But how do you track that they've been to a health fair, or they went to a church event, or they took a call on the weekend from a client that reached out for additional help? And that's why all these things and considerations, even before hiring, is key, but it's also so critical during the onboarding process that everyone has an understanding of what this looks like. Next slide. So we'll talk about supportive supervision as well, and what that looks like. And definitely mentorship is key. Supportive supervision is key. So having those regular check-ins to promote communication, understanding that may be an extension to what may happen in the clinic, in the organization, and that community health workers may be out in the field, in the community, home visits, interacting with patients, clients, and also knowing that there's opportunities for training for supervision, and not necessarily on learning how to supervise, but having more intentional supervision opportunities for those, especially those who are not experienced in community health work and don't come from that background. And so we do understand that in many situations that supervisors may be social workers or nurses, and there are some common skills there, but understanding the unique aspect of these particular roles is really key in being able to support and motivate community health workers in the very hard work that is done. Next slide. And so we see this, and so we always talk about things to be aware of, things to consider. And so with supervision, as I just noted, that in many situations, it may be someone with a background that may be more clinical, or a background in social work, or more administrative, but we want to make sure that irregardless of what the background is, that there's a deep understanding of the experience and the scope of work of community health workers. And so being intentional about increasing your individual awareness, understanding, and education around the role, the skills, and the qualities of a really good team member that is doing this work. Next slide. And so here are some key takeaways. Julie and I went through all of the above, but I want to focus on the last bullet of this slide. And it's the fact that this takes time. We know that when you're testing or trying out something new, or even when you're enhancing something and taking advantage of opportunities to expand your programming, that any innovation is change, and change takes trust, and change takes time. And so understanding that you have support through the Envision team to really support you when you have questions in any of these areas, we are definitely here to support you in that regard. And with that, these strategies in mind, I am super excited to hear from our three panelists alongside our facilitator of our panel, Ms. Lisa Renee Holderby-Fox, who is our new Envision program manager and also an experienced community health worker with over 30 years, even though she looks 21, in the field. And so with that, I will hand it over to you, Lisa Renee.
Thank you, Andrea, and good afternoon, everyone. As Andrea said, I'm Lisa Renee Holderby-Fox. I am excited to be here this afternoon and extremely excited because we have 3 experts that are going to share some of their background and some of their knowledge, particularly with the early bringing on of CHWs, recruitment, interviewing, etc. And they're all CHWs who have been engaged in state and national CHW movement. All of them actually are involved with the National Association of CHWs, and all are also involved in their statewide coalition or association. But that's not a fair introduction of any of them. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to please take a moment and introduce themselves. And I just want to remind us all that I know we're really excited about this topic. We're passionate about this topic. But if I could just remind the panelists that we have folks who are doing interpretation for us, and so that we need to be conscious of the speed in which we're speaking, myself included. And so with that, Agner, would you please kick off the introductions?
Of course, thank you, Liza Renee. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Agner Muñoz Eñe in Spanish. Liza told me to do it like that, so I really appreciate that. Vasquez is my mother's last name, so I'm Puerto Rican, so I use 2 last names, and sometimes I also use 2 names. I'm a CHW certified, proudly working for PASO's organization. I'm the Midlands coordinator, which means that I supervise and oversee the progress of our 2 main programs here in the Midlands, which are PASO's Health Connection, which I probably have to say is a best practice recognized by the MCH a few years ago. And also I oversee and supervise the progress of our Connection for Child Development program, which is also a promising practice around the country. I'm just very honored to be part of this and for the invitation. So thank you, and I'll be right here.
Amber?
Hi, everyone. My name is Amber Culver, and I am a community health worker and the CHW program manager of one of our 2 community health worker programs at my organization, which is the North Country Health Consortium. We are northern New Hampshire, so when I say northern, I mean within 20 minutes to an hour, we could be in Vermont, Maine, or Canada. We're way up high. And so we are an area that's typically described as isolated, sheltered, friendly, and also grumpy. So we have communities that can be kind of tough nuts to crack. But my background is I was an LNA for several years before first hearing the word community health worker in 2017. And so I'm very excited to be here and share some of my experiences.
Thank you. Anna, can I ask you to also introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I am Anna Huff Davis. I chair the Arkansas Community Health Worker Association. I too am a community health worker, and as Julie was saying, I was a community health worker before I knew I was a community health worker. I've been a community health worker mostly all of my adult life. I work for the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, which gives me a unique perspective as to how to integrate community health workers, how to make sure that we are a part of that research that those academic folks do, and to engage, make sure that they know how to engage community folks when they go out into our respective communities. So you say that I'm an expert today. I have heard a lot of what I know that I'm going to reiterate. And those of you who are on here, you're probably more of an expert than I am, but I'm happy to be here and share my experiences.
Thank you all. And again, I just wanted them to introduce themselves because you got a much richer introduction than I could have done. And so I'm going to start the panel discussion by asking Agner. Agner, as a CHW and a CHW supervisor at PASOS, where have you had the most success recruiting for a position? I know that Julia talked about some places that are more successful than others, so I'd love to hear your experience.
Yeah. So how I say, I'm the Midlands area of South Carolina coordinator for PASOS. But when I was hired, the CHWs that I supervised, they were already here. So they were before me. So I haven't had the experience of trying to recruit people here for the Midlands, but I was like Julie was mentioned, I can tell which are the worst place to look or which are the hardest to look for CHWs or CHW certified is in the rural areas. I've been struggling a lot to find qualified individuals for the Saluda Greenwood area. But I have to say that for PASOS, looking for CHWs here in the Midlands, I think the process were easiest. I'm not the first Midlands coordinator, so before me there were other people, and I think the position was filled very fast because there are a lot of CHW certified and people qualified for do the position. So as PASOS, I think the Midlands area it should be easier. But for me as a coordinator supervising other areas, I have to say that rural areas as Saluda Greenwood area are like a little bit harder to find qualified individuals or with the required qualifications.
Thank you, Agner. And Agner, you were just talking about some of the challenges in the rural areas. And so I'd like to ask Amber, who spends all of her time in a rural area of New Hampshire, rural area in New England, if you could share some of the areas where you've had success recruiting and posting for CHW positions.
Yeah, I was, when we're listening to Julie talking about, how Indeed might not be the best option. We do post on Indeed, and I will say it is certainly not the best option. We've never gotten a hire out of our posting on Indeed. I know we're hiring right now, and we just got through resumes from New Jersey. So it's, while you feel like it's a targeted posting, it's really not necessarily. Honestly, social media tends to be really successful for us, and not like a paid ad, just sharing it to our small organizational page, and then our own team members share it to their friends. And word of mouth really is a huge recruitment for us in our area. I mean, that's how I got my job. It was someone told me about the position, and it was actually a family member. And I said, well, I don't know what that is. And she said, well, neither do I, but it sounds like it could be a good fit. And so that's how we've actually gotten most of our hires, word of mouth. We also recruit through our CHW training participants. We see people who have gone through our program and who have done really, really well. And so recruiting, sharing our openings with them and people that they know is a very successful tool for us. So it's keeping it small and local, and really not investing a lot of money into the recruitment process. Facebook, word of mouth tend to be our most successful recruitment techniques.
Thank you, Amber. It sounds like from both you and Agner that it was really community, right? Getting word out in the community, speaking to people in the community that helped you to find some applicants and hopefully some successful hires. Thank you, Amber. So Anna, I know that you've been involved in hiring CHWs yourself. And are there certain qualifications that you find that you're looking for as CHWs are being hired? And are there some requirements maybe, around licensure for other professions that might be required as people are applying?
Well, here in the state of Arkansas and the work that we have been involved in regards to hiring, qualities that we look for, one thing that we specifically look for that was stated several times during the presentation is that the person must be embedded in the community. The person must be a community person. The person must have trust in the community. I have a good friend of mine that always says that community health workers are the nosy neighbors. And so these are folks who know what's going on in the community. And that's one of the main criteria. You must know what's going on in your community. You must have a sense of what the resources are, because in order for you to be effective in connecting folks to resources, you must know what they are, where they are, what the criteria are for eligibility, and all those specific details in regards to resources. Also, there are, I want to sort of back up on recruiting in rural communities. One thing that we have used that's been very, very successful is our recruitment through our faith networks. Faith-based institutions are really important in our rural communities. And those have been places where we have recruited a lot of community health workers, especially in this work that I do regarding research. And so trust is another that Julie was saying earlier. She had said it a number of times, and we'll say it over and over again, because it's essential when you're talking about working in respective communities. Folks who come in from the outside, they can't do very much of anything unless some trust is established. And we learned that very early on in the research that we were trying to engage community folks in. Community folks had to be a part of that process. And so when we talk about qualities, we're looking for trust, we're looking for trustworthiness. That's different from trust now. We're looking for persons who are committed to the community. We're looking for folks who are long-term residents in the community. We're looking for folks who know what's going on in the community. We're looking for folks who are faces of the community. We're looking for folks who have skills that they can share with folks in the community. All of these things are things that seem to be common sense, but they aren't to a lot of people who are trying to bring on community health workers. They don't know what to look for. And as community health workers, we need to be about the business of sharing this information with folks, because a lot of people don't know what to look for, and we can be that resource for them. Those of us who are definitely in leadership roles, when we talk about community health workers, we definitely have to be at the forefront of letting folks who don't know how to operate or who do not have an idea as to what community health workers are and the roles that they play. We have to let them know what those roles and responsibilities and the qualities are. I hope that gives you some insight as to the question that you posed.
It does. Thank you, Anna. And you were mentioning some things that were very important and crucial, quite honestly, for CHWs and for people who are looking to hire CHWs, things that we're looking for. What about specifically asking for licensures or other certifications?
You did ask that, didn't you? In the state of Arkansas, we try, and one thing that we really steer away from is folks who have licenses and certifications in other areas, because what we try and do as a community health worker is to support persons who have licenses and certifications so that they can operate at the top of their field while we're providing other services that they really don't have to bother with, because they're doing what their license or their certification requires them to do. Now, in the state of Arkansas, as far as certification for community health workers, we recently just approved or had our certification approved by a state commission that was selected, appointed, and approved by community health workers and other agency and organization representatives here in the state of Arkansas. We just brought on, or we had 12 persons to apply for certification in the state of Arkansas, and they should be certified within the next 30 days. So we're excited about that. Our actual certification program launched in October, the fall of last year. And we are now approving certification training programs in the state of Arkansas, training programs that will be providing training to community health workers. So we are very new in this process. We're excited about it. As I said, the launch was for our experiential track. We are about to launch our training track in a few months, upcoming months. So we're excited about that as well. So there's a lot going on in the state, but we make sure that persons who are looking to hire community health workers understand that these are individuals who may not hold any type of licensure, any type of certification, But these individuals can be some of the best resources that you will ever find in your community as far as reaching community folks and sharing information and making sure that programs are successful and impactful.
Thank you so much, Anna. So Amber, I'd like to ask you, you shared that you're a fairly new CHW the last several years. So you've recently gone through that interview process that many CHWs go through, and that many of the attendees today may be getting ready to do themselves in interviewing for CHW positions. So could you share what your experience was like interviewing for a CHW position? And then I'm also going to ask you, now that you're doing the hiring of CHWs for CHW positions, are there changes to the process that you would like to incorporate?
Yeah, so my interview left me with very mixed feelings. I think I walked out of that interview believing I was not going to get the position. The parts of the interview that focused on my people skills and how I handle certain situations made me feel really good, and like I was the right fit for the job. But there was also a lot of questions around my education. And, why hadn't I continued going to college after a year? Was I planning to go back? Why would I go back? What other education or certificates did I have that would make me the best candidate? And that left me feeling pretty defeated, and like I wasn't going to get the job. There was two people in my interview. One was the person who would end up being my supervisor, and she's the one who had the very heavy focus on my education. And then the other was the CHW training instructor, who happened to be the mother of one of my best friends. And so I don't like to think that I got hired only because I knew the person interviewing me. But I do give her a lot of credit in the decision to hire me. I fully believe that having someone there who knew the home that I'd grown up in, knew my experience in the community, had seen the struggles that I had overcome as a child and into my early adult years. She knew that my family relied on food pantries. She knew that each school sport that I participated in meant that my parents were going without something. She saw how I was an advocate for my brother who had severe developmental delays. And then kind of how I, picked myself up after his passing. And I believe that those things that she knew about me, I think that's what got me hired. She saw my life experiences, my roots in the community, and my grit, I guess. And now that I do the hiring, changes that I've tried to make in the process is just really focusing on the person's qualities, looking at what makes them a good and reliable and trustworthy person. I truly believe that you can teach skills and roles, but you really just can't teach someone to be a quality person. Julie mentioned earlier that, things, these qualities, they're things that can be built upon and enhanced, but at the core, you can't make someone a good person. The experiences that each of us have is what makes us the right fit, not necessarily how much schooling we have. And also I believe it's important to have CHW team members participating in the interview process, and that was not an experience that I had. So there's just a few things that, as I move forward with the hiring, that I'm trying to incorporate.
Thank you so much, Amber. Agner, we've heard about what makes a good CHW, potentially what makes a good CHW. I hear you're a fantastic supervisor. Can you share what makes you a fantastic supervisor? Is it your experience, life experience working with CHWs, and or the fact that you are also a CHW? The floor is yours.
I believe all that, but I will say I feel that I am part of my team, not over the team. So I work and walk side by side with my team. I just try to provide them with the best opportunities, or put them in situations that they can be successful in the work. So that I'm trying to provide them with tools, education, training, even small things as just updating our database and put the resources with the new staff members, what telephone numbers, if they speak Spanish or not, small things like that. So I'm the one behind the curtain doing that work for them. So I try to make their work easier with the communities, of course, and also I lead by example. I work with them within our community. So I'm with them in every single outreach event that we try. Even though I'm organizing them, I'm with them working with our families there. So I think that's why they respect me, because they feel I'm their equal, but they like to be led by me because of those qualities. But I have to say that I have experience before as a supervisor at many levels, including sports. I'm a track and field coach. I was athletic director. I was a telecommunications supervisor and regional supervisor. So I have kind of experience, but this type of work, which is based on relationship, I enjoy the most. I love to work with communities, and because we are part of those communities, it's not the same job as the other industries or other fields that I worked before. But I truly say that, yeah, a good supervisor, it should be something like that. Lead by example, create opportunities for their team to be successful, putting in the best positions to be successful, and provide them with tools. I always say that we are like Batmans. We have our Batman belt with resources. So I'm the one updating those resources and providing them with the instructions on how to use the resources in the belt.
Thank you so much. And I love that analogy. I think I'm going to have to use that in the near future. Anna, I've got a question for you. You have experience as a CHW and a CHW trainer and a supervisor. Can you speak to the importance of having opportunities for ongoing professional development for CHWs?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that we pride ourselves on here in Arkansas is making sure that we don't train a lot of community health workers and there aren't opportunities for them to go beyond or to even maintain a level of employment, especially employment with a living wage. And so we try and make sure that we provide opportunities for training, continuing education hours, opportunities for advancement in some way. And we try and really work with our employers and our industry and our hospitals and all of those entities to make sure that once they bring on a community health worker, that there's some commitment to maintain that individual as a part of, I heard someone saying before, a team, that they are a member of that team from that point on. And through that process, not only are they availed with opportunities for training through our state association, but also through those entities, so that whether they want to specialize in something, whether that be diabetes prevention, or whether that be cardiovascular disease, or whether that be arthritis, whatever the case may be, that there are some opportunities for them to pursue that training. If they want to go on and move to another level of health and education or whatever it may be, and coming from an academic institution, I try and make sure that there are opportunities there as well. You know, the academic institution seems to think that everybody has to have a certain level of education. I hear what you're saying, Amber. And when they say that you have to have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or whatever, especially when we're advertising for community health workers, that doesn't work in our communities sometimes. So we're really trying to promote and help academic folks understand that this is not the best avenue sometimes to pursue, but we do want you to provide us with avenues for continuing education. And we want those avenues to be at the level where our community health workers can understand and comprehend that information. So it has to be in layman's terms. And so we ask them, or we encourage them to invite community health workers in to help establish these curriculums, to look at whatever curriculums they have to make sure they're community health worker friendly, community friendly, and all of those things. So we really do support and try and promote continuing education. We are about to convene our annual meeting, and we are asking some community health workers to sit alongside of our academic folks to do the presentations. I'm so excited about that because normally you have the academic folks, the PhDs who come in and they do all the presenting. Well, I always say nobody is more of a PhD in my community than I am. So I look at community health workers in the same fashion. We are the experts in our community. So why wouldn't we be the ones presenting those particular presentations and being on those panels and all of that? So I definitely support, and as an association, we support continuing education. We may not call it that. We may call it professional development or whatever. We even had some discussions one time about what it should be called. And so it's really interesting, the conversations that you have with academic folks when you start talking about the different nuances or the different resources that should be available to community health workers.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I'm going to ask everybody a question that I didn't share with you earlier, but I think that, Anna, you've really opened up the door for talking about the engagement and involvement of statewide and or the National CHW Association in assisting with professional development, offering opportunities. So I'm going to go to Agner first and ask him if he could speak to any of those opportunities or the importance of having the South Carolina CHW Association engaged.
Oh, definitely is a crucial part of our work. It's like being part of a big network of CHW. So even for trying to recruit CHW for some position is a very useful tool, being part of this association, because it is the source. It's like the nucleus of all. So just sharing the positions that you have open within our state CHW association website and the national, even in national, and it can work for both ways. Maybe I have a CHW that is trying to move to New York, and because it is looking at the National CHW Association website, he or she can see that posting, and it's an opportunity to move or keep working the work. But yeah, definitely is a crucial work. And I encourage every single CHW that recently has been certified to just be part and apply to be part of the state association and even at national level. Definitely is a very crucial part of our work.
Amber, how about your thoughts?
So as far as engagement, providing opportunities for professional development or continuing education with your statewide coalition or association. As a co-chair of the New Hampshire CHW Coalition, I see it as being vital that we participate in that process. What we find is that many organizations, they tend to just provide professional development opportunities that directly benefit the specific role the community health worker might be in. And they might just be, your once a year update refresher trainings on kind of some of those basic things. Our coalition, anytime we meet with our membership, we're always asking, so what is it that you guys want to see next? And I think that provides kind of a more well-rounded slate of opportunities, things that CHWs might not necessarily have the opportunity to participate in just through their employer. And I think it exposes CHWs to a lot of other topics besides just what their employer views as beneficial to their specific position. So when you have that diverse group of people coming together and all these different ideas flowing, a community health worker can have a lot of opportunities to be trained in a lot of different areas that they might not have otherwise known that they'd be trained in.
Thank you, Amber. I'm going to ask you to stay put and share, if you don't mind, what was most helpful to you in your onboarding as a community health worker?
So I'm not telling everyone to just go out and do this. Slow down and let me explain. My first week of being a community health worker, we were asked to write our program manual because the program didn't exist. And so they hired us and said, now that you're here, you got to write your own rules. And I thought, I am not qualified for this. And so I'm not telling you to ask community health workers to write their own program manual. But it was a lot about owning something. coming into a program and being given ownership of something, by the time we were finished, I knew my program inside and out, and I was so confident in talking about it. And I felt like I was just as much a part of this program as it was of me. And it made me not want to leave. And so I think that while it might not be a program manual, but it could be something else, allowing community health workers to take ownership of something within the program. It could be something as simple as supply inventory. This is your piece, and this is, you manage this, and this is your responsibility. I find we have a lot better engagement when people feel like you own something. I think that's true across any type of job. And then also having a mentor. So when I was hired, I did not have a mentor. Like I said, there was no other community health workers to mentor us. And my supervisor was not a community health worker and hadn't done a lot in community engagement or outreach. And so everything we did felt very administrative and clinical and kind of sterile. And then one day she went on medical leave, and we kind of floated around without a supervisor for a few months, really not accomplishing much. And then we were paired up with another manager who was tasked to help us facilitate a meeting. And she had never been a community health worker before, but she had been someone who acknowledged that she needed a community health worker when she was younger. She had walked through some really, really treacherous times in her life. And so she understood the value of what we could offer. And so as soon as she paired up with us and she became this mentor to us, our program was able to flourish. So two of the things that I find the most helpful in onboarding is ownership and mentorship.
Thank you, Amber. And we heard that from Andrea's presentation earlier, right? The importance of getting creative and making sure that CHWs are engaged in program development. Creating a manual on your first day might not be the way to go, but the idea of including CHWs in the development of programs, I think, is really important. I'm going to shift gears for us for a few moments. And COVID-19 and now its variants continue to impact our lives on a daily basis. And I know that they have impacted each of your work. So I'm going to ask you each to talk for a few minutes about how COVID-19 has impacted your work. How have you been able to adapt as needed to do that work? And if you could share any challenges and successes in doing that. I know that's a mouthful and I'll repeat it if need be. Agner, how about starting with you?
Thank you, Lisa. So yeah, definitely COVID-19 has impacted our work as community health workers with our interpersonal, like direct interactions with persons. So we had to move back because of the social distance. We had to move like a little bit away of outreach events and gathering of people in the same place or just visiting houses because of course it wasn't safe. So we move our efforts to the virtual world. Most of our programs or the information that we were providing in our home visiting or the interactions in the live events or outreach event, we moved that all to the Facebook world or to a web page or a web page. So we start to do this series of programs where we share with our participants all the resources, all the programs, we interview people. And of course, we focus our work to the whole COVID-19 pandemic. So we start to bring like doctors, people from DHED, people from CDC to talk to our people in Spanish in their same language. So to try to put away all that misinformation that were out there in the beginning, because our families, they are living here, but they're still listening to the home country news and radio. So the information that they were hearing, or the information that they just were paying attention was not the right one, because of different vaccinations that the vaccines, types of vaccines that they have in their country. So, and the side effects are different. So they were paying attention to that information in their home country. They were not attention to the CDC or DHEC information that was like strictly related to us here in the United States. So we start to provide them with the right information in their home language, in Spanish. So that's the first. And of course, we start to be part of other coalitions with other partner organizations. That was a crucial part. At the beginning, we joined forces with South Carolina Appleseed to start to put for changes to get access to the people without legal documentation. We start that push to provide them the access to those services, to those renter assistance programs that were out there, but they were not be able to be part because they didn't have any documentation. So we start that advocacy part of the job. So once that we accomplish that, then we start to help our people to connect them with those resources. And it didn't have to be in the live interview with the person, like direct interaction with people. We start to do this with telephone because, of course, also the services or the programs or the organization, they were closed. They were not receiving people as well. So everybody, not just us, everybody here in South Carolina moved to the virtual world. So start to do more calls and Facebook Live transmissions and putting everything in the website. So it was challenging. It was a very challenging process, but now we are used to. Now we are not leaving that behind. We're still providing information. We have gone with this series. For example, we have the Week Wednesdays. We provide week information to our participants in the Hispanic families in South Carolina. We keep providing information and the access to that service that was impacted also by COVID-19. So we are providing with information on how to access them through this pandemic. That's, for example, for our Child's Connection Development Program, we create a program called Pasos para Crecer, which is Steps to Grow. And we provide families and mothers of young children with tools and how to help them, their children at their home, not without having an intervention of no one in their houses, how to provide them with tools to help these kids with their development and stuff like that. So it was very challenging, but we enjoy a lot this process and we're still enjoying this. It was awesome.
Thank you, Agner. It sounds like you all met the challenge head on.
It was a challenge, still a challenge, but we really enjoy the whole process.
Thank you. Thank you. Anna, how about yourself? How has your work changed?
I have to piggyback on what Agner was saying. We had to go out and debunk a lot of myths, a whole lot of myths. Even though our folks were right here, they were listening to their neighbors and their friends and all these folks saying all these things that weren't true. So we had to come up with a way to get information out. And once again, we relied on our faith network to get some information out. Even though we know our sanctuaries were not open, people were still trying to have their services online, over the phone, through conference calls. I was amazed at how that worked, and it really worked. So we were able to get information out that way. And Agner also touched on, we had to deal with a lot of the other social determinants of health. People were being booted out of their housing because they couldn't pay their rent before all these things came online that were available. And then when resources came available, people didn't know how to access the resources. So we had to try and share with them how you actually access the resource. And not being able to go face to face was truly a challenge, because that's how we operate as community health workers. We go to folks. And so we had to come up with other ways to do that as well. We partnered with our Arkansas Minority Health Commission, which has a mobile unit. We also partnered with the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, which had a mobile unit, trying to encourage folks to get vaccinated, but we know how that didn't work as well as we had planned. So now we're following up with those folks, trying to find those who are vaccine hesitant and who absolutely say no, who are vaccine resistant, trying to encourage them to get vaccinated. We found that a lot of people were losing family members, and it was terrible, but this convinced some folks to really go out and get vaccinated, and then they share that information with other folks. but we had to create materials. We had to create some additional materials because materials had been created, but we had to create some additional materials that we could take out to our particular residents and clients. We had to come up with ways that we could meet with them that was safe. We had to provide them with masks. We had to do all these things to make sure that they were protected and that we were protected. So it was a lot more work than we probably would have entailed if we had not had the pandemic. But as community health workers, we're accustomed to work. So that's no big deal to us. We're used to getting out there in the trenches and doing what we need to do. We still went door to door, but we had to be careful. We had to be safe. We had to know how to protect ourselves. And also we tried to assist them in getting the supplies that they needed to make sure that they were safe in their own homes. We also had to deal with the issues around food insecurity. It was a big issue, very big issue, because people couldn't get to the grocery store. Transportation, that was another issue. All of those things came to play, which are common to us, but they were even more common during this time of pandemic. So there were a lot of funds that became available during this time. There were a lot of organizations and entities who received funds. Some of those funds were used appropriately and some were not. So we tried to make sure that we took advantage of some of those opportunities and provided those funds to our clients in our respective communities, provided resources. Providing resources was essential and is still essential during this time. We knew that pandemic and it'll still be the same after the pandemic is gone.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. That was powerful. Amber, I'm going to ask you if you could also share just very briefly what has happened in New Hampshire, and then we'll close out our panel.
So I'll say the New Hampshire experience was slightly different, especially in the northern part of the state where I am. I think that we were probably a full year behind in the pandemic and just where we weren't getting the infections. And because we already live kind of a really isolated, we were social distancing before we were asked to. And so it was probably a year in before my town even got its first case of COVID. And so we actually noticed a decrease in usage of food pantries. So it was just a really interesting, my organization is the lead for, one of the leads for the state's public health network and the emergency response network. And so they were very proactive in setting an example for the communities in staying home and not going into other people's homes and, whatnot. But we also have limited internet access and very limited cell phone service. And so it made it really challenging to communicate with the people that we weren't being allowed to see in person. And they weren't coming out for the services either. So we kind of had an opposite experience where we were kind of sent home and made to stay home and try to talk to people on the phone. And that was a very frustrating experience. But I think our community health workers did a really great job in finding ways to make that work. And I think that we are a better, more well-rounded team having gone through that. And knowing that we can still do the good work even if we're not in their home. So
I thank you. I want to thank you all for sharing very diverse experiences that you've had. I'm going to take just one question, I think, that has popped into the chat. I'm trying to pay attention to the chat and the panel as well. But there's a question about resources. And does anybody on the panel have suggestions or recommend places to build training curriculums when onboarding CHWs, or does anybody know of a really great onboarding curriculum that they'd like to share? If not, that's okay, but I just wanted to open it up, and I see some responses coming into the chat, so.
The resource that Julie has shared is an awesome one. And as I said before, try to enroll in your state CHW association also, because most of them provide with other resources that might be available in your state. Yeah, I will say, and also the national, the NACHW association as well, because they provide resources. You can find like the annual conference, that the gatherings and stuff, which are really good, and resources are shared in those type of events that these organizations provide.
Thank you.
I also recommend finding another organization in your area who has a successful CHW program and leaning on them. They're familiar with that particular area as well, and kind of how community health workers function in your area. I know we provide that kind of technical assistance for other organizations in our area. So I do recommend reaching out to your neighbors.
I echo that same sentiment. We don't have a curriculum per se in the state of Arkansas, but the Arkansas Association definitely tries to assist new programs in creating or establishing whatever resources they need to operate.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I just want to reiterate that there are some resources available. There's also, if your state has a statewide association, please tap into the statewide association or coalition or network. And also, please utilize the National Association as a resource, and all of us, right? We want to utilize each other as resources. So with that, I'm sorry, panel, but we need to close out so that Jamal can close out the webinar. But I just want to thank you all for your time and willingness to share your expertise today.
It was an honor. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, panelists. Thank you, Amber. Thank you, Agner. Thank you, Anna, for all of that super, super amazing information and lived experience that CHW work is. And of course, for those who are wondering, if you want to, get in contact with our panelists, that information is on the presentation. And of course, the presentation will be uploaded on, sorry, my voice is kind of gone, uploaded on AMP and of course on YouTube as well, but we'll give that information. So let's see. But yes, so once again, thank everybody for coming into the space and really learning and sharing all the different expertise